South Africans and South African businesses and South African consumers have made huge sacrifices to keep this big government bureaucracy and these government vanity projects going. It's now time for government to really make sacrifices, and that includes
South Africa's governing party, the African National Congress, is concerned about price increases in the economy over the last year or so, and even more concerned that these prices are not coming down. The ANC thinks things are going better now. We've solved load shedding. Everything is hunky-dory, so why can't we just have 5 Rand chickens, for example? Why aren't clothes cheaper? All that sort of thing. The centralizing tendencies are coming to the fore. And joining me to discuss this, as well as the potential risks of this narrative, but also the policy risks, should it be implemented in terms of actual policy, is Martin van Staden from the Free Market Foundation. Martin, thank you very much for being with us at the CRA. Once again, we greatly appreciate your time and your insights. Just to start off with a little bit of context in terms of these latest utterances from representatives of the ANC, from your perspective, and then also we can get into maybe what the concrete implications might be.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So, I mean, the CPI index recently showed that the cost of living is rising. I think all South Africans and maybe even everyone around the world can relate to the fact that things aren't getting cheaper. And the ANC is obviously picking up on this. We're in full electioneering mode now. So the ANC is very outraged about the things that most South Africans are outraged about. So that's kind of the context, and they feel, as they always do, that the government has to intervene somehow to solve this problem. But the thing people need to realize is that it's precisely because government has interfered way too much up to this point that things are certainly more expensive in South Africa than it is in countries where government interferes less. So this is not a kind of a spontaneous or an organic thing that we're experiencing with things being so expensive. It is very much a policy-induced crisis. Things surely will get kind of more expensive in general, and then with competition get cheaper. So it's not outside the realm of possibility. But the fact that things are so consistently just going up and up and up, and people are getting despondent about it, points to a very malevolent political force behind it.
Martin, just drilling down into some of those policies that might increase costs or keep them high. So, I mean, all countries around the world had to deal with COVID-19. That's a sort of global occurrence. Same during 2008 with the global financial crisis. These global events happened. Now recently, the escalation of conflict as a result of Hamas's attacks in Israel. This will impact on global oil prices, moving of goods and services, increased costs and risk for businesses. So at the end of the day, consumers will bear the brunt of that. But in terms of one's own policy choices that make things more expensive, so we look at electricity, for example, logistics, those are the easiest examples, maybe crime with the decline of the capacity of the police, labor laws that make business operation more expensive, especially for small businesses that don't have the capacity to deal with all the regulations and red tape. Why do you think there perhaps isn't that acknowledgement and that disconnect from the ANC side, where you talk about reform and all that sort of thing? If you really want lower prices to be passed on to consumers, why not then make the general operating environment more conducive and less costly?
Yeah, no, I mean, Chris, you took the words right out of my mouth. That all those things are why things are so costly, and the problem is with the ANC and like-minded individuals is that they do not acknowledge the notion that interference in market processes causes price distortions. So to the ANC, it's like, well, we'll raise taxes because we need more money, but that cannot mean that the price of the goods of the people we're taxing must also go up. No, they must be willing to kind of absorb the taxes into their profits and kind of just keep their prices as they are, if not lower them. So it's a very kind of elementary, almost like kindergarten economic approach, where the people who apparently govern us and this notion of manage the economy simply do not understand economics. Now, you and I understand, and I think most rational South Africans will understand, that prices will go down, if not go down, at least not so consistently go up, if rolling blackouts are solved, which is, in my view, a relatively easy to solve crisis. If crime were really dealt with in a way that you can do business without investing hundreds of thousands of rand in security. If the cost of labor, which is astronomical in South Africa, really above other countries, kind of in our category. If the cost of labor was cheaper, if we didn't have hugely inflated, artificially inflated fuel prices in South Africa, and really if the general kind of compliance burden on businesses was just lower, then we wouldn't have this issue. So it is within government's power, really fundamentally, to intervene and solve the problem, but that does mean that government has to sacrifice. South Africans and South African businesses and South African consumers have made huge sacrifices to keep this big government bureaucracy and these government vanity projects going. It's now time for government to really make sacrifices, and that includes reducing the number of civil servants, because that's why government is so expensive, primarily because we have a large number of civil servants who are not productive and who do not do their jobs properly and who do not help create that environment for doing business. In fact, they make it much more difficult to do business in South Africa. So government has to make these sacrifices. Government has to downsize its own institutional scale, and it needs to downsize the scope of its activities in the economy. And I think the natural result of that will be a far more bearable cost of living, and certainly I think a raise in living conditions, simply as more South Africans start working.
Martin, just a final question in terms of possible policy interventions or changes. So the narrative and the rhetoric is there now in terms of, this is, things aren't right. We as central planners, we have the knowledge to tell you how things should develop. So we'll intervene accordingly. And as you say, in an election cycle, the incentive is there for more radical interventions to be upped. So in terms of the sort of options open, where do you see the biggest risks in terms of that stepping in by the government into the economy, trying to manage things, as it were, and the possible consequences of those interventions?
Yeah, so I think firstly, the fact that the ANC is just commenting like this recklessly already has a chilling effect on investors out there who rightly or wrongly believe that they need to have a lot of flexibility to set prices for their goods. Certainly the poultry industry and the retailers clearly believe that they need that flexibility to set the prices for goods if something like an avian flu hits. So government has this huge megaphone, which it has to use responsibly, and it could use that megaphone to spread information, to tell people, listen, this strain of avian flu, the virus is burned away in heat. So eating chicken, properly prepared chicken or eggs, is not dangerous to your health. That is something the government can do. That would be kind of a legitimate use of government, kind of government's megaphone. What it does instead is threaten, kind of unspecifically, interventions. And it alluded, the ANC, when they made these comments, alluded to the DTIC. And whenever anyone alludes to the DTIC, they're usually alluding to the Competition Commission, which has in recent years had these market inquiries. It won't be a surprise if they launch one, and they have launched ones into the price of basic foodstuffs. Maybe they'll target the poultry industry specifically now and come down harder on, for instance, mergers and acquisitions and so on. And then there's also the DTIC controls trade, tariffs and protectionism and so on. So that's also something that could happen, stop South Africans from exporting chicken or whatever else the ANC thinks needs to be here so that the price can be lower, apparently. And then, of course, the old faithful, unfortunately for government, is price controls. Now, we don't have too much of that in South Africa, thankfully, except in crucial industries like fuel and petrol. But we do have it. It does lurk in the background. And even in telecommunications, for instance, people don't realize that ICASA does have the lawful power to set price controls for internet and for data and so forth. And it shouldn't be surprising to us if the ANC and the government wants to roll out price controls for basic foodstuffs. So there are risks here, but I think the chilling effect already of the ANC saying, wow, look at how the market is responding to something serious like a virus. We do not agree with how the market is responding. We're going to interfere and stop the market from responding. That is a huge risk in any industry, in any sector. And the government, no government or any kind of government adjacent entity like a political party in government should be engaging in such reckless rhetoric. The way the market responds to crises and so forth is how it is going to respond. The government should rather find a way to use its megaphone in a responsible way, get the information out there, tell people how things really are, and then hope that responsible adult South Africans, responsible adult producers will react in a proper way. But it will cause more harm than good to actually start interfering, and it will just drive up the cost of living.
Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't yet, we invite you to like this video before you leave. We also invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you have not yet done so. Until next time, this has been Chris Hattingh for the Center for Risk Analysis. Take care.